We need to improvise and make the best out of a bad situation. And besides, it made for a great story that I could share with all of you today.
That's true. Speaking of stories, do you have any other funny or interesting stories related to cooking that you would like to share with our listeners?
Of course, John. One time, I tried making spaghetti carbonara for dinner but accidentally used sugar instead of salt. It turned out so sweet that my kids actually loved it and asked for seconds. Another time, I mistook cumin powder for cinnamon and sprinkled it on my pancakes instead of syrup. Let's just say my taste buds were in for a rude awakening.
Those stories are hilarious. We can definitely all relate to cooking mishaps. Thank you so much for sharing your stories with us today, Poe. It was great having you on the show.
Thank you for having me, John. And listeners, if there's one lesson you can take away from this conversation, it's that mistakes are just opportunities to get creative.
And now, here's the Paul Reagan Show with your host, Paul Reagan.
I can't wait to hear you sing this amazing song. What's your name?
Hannah, and I hope I don't mess it up too much.
Don't worry, we're going to have a blast. Let's start.
It's all relative.
Isn't it, Steve? Yeah, and Mildred just called and said Uncle Pete passed away, and we're having a family reunion.
Have to split his estate, so guess who's gotta go to Kalamazoo? That's right, the Jew.
Can't choose your family.
It's always a shame.
You all know the name.
'Cause without them, we wouldn't be here.
But they can make you drink beer.
And wear a lampshade on your head.
Imagine Daddy walking around in women's underwear. Grandma's getting smashed like a screen door in a hurricane.
You can choose your friends, but you can't choose your family.
So we try to ignore them in order to maintain some sanity.
Oh yeah.
I'll admit they're an eccentric clan. Papa's been arrested for indecent exposure.
Grandma's getting loaded and she's BJ boxing.
Everybody smokes pot, but they haven't done that other drug. What's it called again?
Okay, boomer. But let's go back to singing.
Nothing shatters like a family. It's said that all God's children got to somewhere they belonged.
Failed disclaimer. Not responsible for Oedipal complex or Electra syndrome. No warranty expressed or implied.
I'm so glad I've got my own. But technically, you're still part of my gene pool.
I know, right? I think it's the one thing that makes us family. Alright, let's keep going.
Isn't it, Steve? Yeah, and Mildred just called and said Uncle Pete passed away, and we're having a family reunion. And drink until you are insane.
And now, here's the Paul Reagan Show with your host, Paul Reagan.
Welcome to the Poe Reagan Show. I'm your host, Poe Reagan.
Hi Poe, thanks for having me on the show.
It's my pleasure, Ashley. So, I hear you're an expert in interior design. What inspired you to pursue that career?
I've always loved creating beautiful spaces and expressing my creativity through design. I decided to pursue a career in interior design so I could turn my passion into a profession.
That's really cool. What are some common mistakes people make when decorating their homes?
One common mistake is not considering the scale and proportion of furniture and decor in a room. Another is not incorporating enough texture and color to make a space feel interesting and inviting.
Interesting. What are some tips you would give someone who's looking to refresh their home decor?
I would suggest starting with a color palette that inspires you and building the rest of the design around that. Also, don't be afraid to mix and match styles and textures to create a unique and personalized look.
Great advice, Ashley. Thanks for sharing your expertise with us today.
Thanks for having me, Poe. It was a pleasure.
And now, here's the Paul Reagan Show with your host, Paul Reagan.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Non-Erotic Podcast. Today, I am joined by my good friend and dining enthusiast, Name Here. Name Here, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Poe. Excited to hear about your top 5 non-erotic dinners.
Thanks for being here, Name Here. As you know, dining is one of my greatest passions, and I am excited to share my top 5 picks. First on the list is a classic spaghetti and meatballs. Now, some may argue that slurping noodles and biting into meatballs can be erotic, but for me, it's all about the nostalgia of a homemade Italian meal with family and friends.
That sounds delicious. What's next on the list?
Next up is a hearty Thanksgiving dinner. I know some people might think that the smorgasbord of food and indulgence can be sexy, but for me, it's all about indulging in comfort food and spending quality time with loved ones.
Ah yes, nothing beats mashed potatoes and cranberry sauce. What's number 3?
Number 3 on the list is a simple yet satisfying hamburger with fries. Some might consider eating a burger erotic, but it's really just about enjoying a juicy burger with all the fixings and crispy fries.
I couldn't agree more. And number 4.
Number 4 on the list is a classic New York-style pizza. Eating a slice of pizza can definitely be messy, but for me, it's all about savoring the flavors and texture of this iconic food in its birthplace.
Pizza is always a winner. And the last one on the list.
Last but not least is a delicious and aromatic bowl of pho. This Vietnamese noodle soup may seem like an odd addition to the list, but for me, it's all about the complex flavors and communal dining experience where everyone gathers around to share a big pot of soup.
Wow, Po. I am impressed and hungry now.
Thank you, Name here. It was great having you on today's show. And remember, listeners, always embrace your love for non-erotic foods.